Happy Saturday, and thank you for joining us. This is Adelita Grijalva, and we're having a Plática with Adelita. So these Pláticas or chats started during the campaign when we were trying to engage voters in what issues were concerning them. And now, since being elected into office, we're going to continue the conversations talking about different issues that are coming up in our community. And today I thought it was incredibly timely for us to talk about issues facing Pima County and how we can work together to solve them. And where we are today is remembering Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy, specifically his legacy of nonviolence and fighting for justice and racial equality. So important, I think, and such a timely conversation to have right now, considering that we are in the position that we're in our nation and in our community. Martin Luther King Jr. dedicated his life to the nonviolent struggle for equality in the United States. The third Monday in January marks Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It's a federal holiday. It honors King's legacy and challenges citizens to engage in volunteer service in their community. And I'm going to ask each of you what is going on in our community. I know that we just had a screen up of a virtual conversation that people are asking our community members to join, and I'm definitely going to do that, but also talk a little bit about what else we're going to do as far as service. Martin Luther King Jr. helped organize the Montgomery bus boycott, a year-long campaign touched off with seamstress Rosa Parks, and she was arrested after refusing to give up her seat in the bus to a white passenger. After the Supreme Court overturned Alabama's bus segregation laws in 1956, King co-founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and promoted nonviolent action for civil rights throughout the South. But what does this legacy mean for us today? And so has this dream been achieved? And I would say no, but we are going to continue to work towards that. But joining me today, I'm so very grateful for each of them taking time to join me, is Jordan Hart and Tanya Stozer. And so I'm going to have them each introduce themselves and just kind of talk about just a really quick intro, and then we'll get into some talking points. So Jordan, do you want to go ahead and start?
Hi, I'm Jordan Hart. I go to University High School and I'm a sophomore.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit about some of the other activities you're involved in your community? I know when I was talking to your dad, he's very proud of all the things that you're a part of, and so I want to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about those.
Yeah, and then I'm also a part of an organization called Jack and Jill, and I serve on the Far West Regional Team Board as treasurer, and then I am treasurer for the MEC-YAC. And then I'm also part of an organization called UniVets, where we provide a grant to a local organization in Tucson. And then I also do community service, and I compete in oratorical.
You compete in what? I'm sorry?
Oratorical contests.
Oh, that's so great. Well, thank you so much for you seem very busy, so I really appreciate you taking some time here. And Tanya, my friend, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Tanya Strozier. I'm the very proud principal of Holiday Fine Arts Magnet School. I am a mom of 6 and a grandmother of 1, Khalees. I just also the founding president of Tucson Alliance of Black School Educators. I work on other coalitions and community organizations about it. And so that's just a little bit about who I am.
And you also have quite a presence on social media.
Yeah, I do.
You want to advertise that a little bit?
Well, the first thing I want to do is this is a brand that my son started. It's called It's Not Us Versus Them, It's Us Versus Racism. And so I absolutely love this, because that's what it's about. It's not about us being against anyone, but it's us collective being against racism. So that's a really strong message that I'm very proud of that he is promoting. And so I just am I've worked with the Tucson Police Department. I did that over the summer, and that was a very eye-opening experience for me. So I really am very committed to equity, but also about being a bridge so that, groups that are really, really separated can find a way to come together.
Well, thank you, and please make sure to give the information so we can tell other people how to connect. And then, so what I want to really talk about is, what does Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy mean to you? Tanya, do you want to start it off? Yeah.
Yeah, it really what it means to me is about taking the opportunities that are either they're going to be given to you or you take them. About using your voice for standing up for what you believe, being that bridge, being an advocate for equity, really to honor every culture. And that's what's really important to me and I do that within my school, is to honor every single culture, and really to be honest about our history, to develop really a critical consciousness about the things that have happened in our history, but use that to propel us to a better future. And so I think what his legacy does for me is remind me that I have a voice. Not only do I have a voice, but I have a voice that I have an obligation to use, not just for myself, but for my community. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that what you're saying, it really resonates with me. It's like I have a voice and I have to speak up for those who can't. And I think that that's really, really important right now, because with so many things that we're seeing nationally, just some really bigoted, racist, horrible comments. We need everyone that is offended by those things to say something. Like the time for us to sit around and sort of say, I'm just going to let that one go. That time is we can't do that anymore. Jordan, do you want to talk a little bit about what MLK's legacy means to you?
Yeah, his legacy to me means basically a lot what Ms. Tanya said about speaking up and advocating for social justice. And it's really an inspiration for me to do those things, and then also focus on a lot of stuff like philanthropy. And it also represents a unification for people, for all people around the world.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so much that, we as people of color have to really unite together and push back against some of these things and educate people on why it's some of the systemic problems that we have, that when we talk about systemic racism, what that means. And I'm so grateful to you, Tanya, for being a part of working with the Tucson Police Department, because I think that that's where we really start to unpeel some of the profiling that happens when people say, well, no, I don't profile. Well, when's the last time you had any kind of cultural consciousness sort of training? Because sometimes these systems are sort of set up that way to kind of keep us in this without even acknowledging that this is a problem. It's like, well, that's just the way it is. It's a culture of law enforcement. Well, where did that come from? And talk more about the history of how these things happen.
Yeah. And, one thing that I really appreciate that came out of that work that I did with them in the summer is that, we're not going to, actually, I was able to do a presentation to the members of that team that I was working with. And so I think that just being given that platform was pretty powerful. But one of the things that was a huge takeaway for me is, one, some of the things that we assume about people, some of the things that I didn't want the police to do, I was actually doing to them. Where I didn't want them to dehumanize my people, I found that there were ways that I was dehumanizing them. So it really taught me that there's lessons that we can learn from each other. But then another powerful thing is that I really appreciated that we didn't debate. We did not debate systemic racism. We assumed systemic racism. That's the place where I think that I would love to see all leaders and organizations get to, is that we're not going to debate it. We're going to assume the presence and then act from that. That's, to me, that's a whole paradigm shift that I think is really powerful.
Jordan, what's a reason, you talked about a lot of the organizations that you're a part of at your age. What do you think some of the reasons are that you're so involved, and what continues to keep you engaged in some of those organizations that you're a part of?
Well, as an African-American girl, I experience racism, and I see racism, and especially everything that's going on with the world and this nation. That really fuels me to continue with those organizations and speak up for social justice.
And so what are some things that because you said that you've had to experience those things. Where did you experience, where's like somewhere that you can bring up so we can start? Because I think that it's important for us to address how our young people are sort of exposed to racism without us even realizing that that's what's happening. I mean, now that my children, I have 3 of them in 3 different TUSD schools, I just, you hear things. You like walk by an open door and you can listen in on lessons now where you couldn't before. And I also like to listen in on the math classes because I need some tutelage in order to help my children with math. But I hear things, and then I ask my daughter, I'm like, so how do you think that was a racist comment? And she'll look at me. Well, no, I've heard it before. I'm like, but that doesn't make it okay. Do you understand why? And so being able to have these conversations has sort of been one silver lining in this pandemic. But I think that a lot of people don't even realize that they are. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the comment, I'm colorblind.
Oh.
Like, no, you're not. You just don't, you don't want to be accused of being a racist. So you say you're colorblind, as opposed to acknowledging that you can always learn something. You don't appreciate that that's what you're doing until, someone can call you on it, and you have to be open to listening. Tanya, do you want to talk about the organizations and stuff that you're a part of?
Sure, but I do want to address just the colorblindness in education. Mm-hmm. I think that there was a period in just education where that was the safe thing to say, that you were colorblind, because you didn't want to be accused of being a racist. But honestly, the fact that you could say you're colorblind is your privilege, because you get to decide if you want to see color. I don't get to decide that. I wake up every day and know that I'm a beautiful brown. So it's when you have the choice, then that's a privilege that's actually speaking. But the organization that recently started is the Tucson Alliance of Black School Educators. And what it is it's an organization that is meant for parents, students, and educators, or anyone that works with children of African-American descent. And our goal is really to be advocates, to be change agents, to help them to be successful, to help them to matriculate to college, but also to make sure that all of their needs are being met in the educational environment. So we recognize that parents need advocates. We recognize that parents need to be informed and empowered so that we can build this network of support around our African-American students so that they can be successful. Now, you don't have to be African-American to be a part of the organization, but we do make our primary focus the success of African-American students in Pima County.
Well, and I think that that's so critical, because if our African-American children and other children of color are successful, everyone will be. That's just kind of the way it works. Mm-hmm. But I do think that it's important to have things that engage young people and teachers that have been trained on how to have engaging, relevant curriculum. And Jordan, I know that you've been in TUSD schools. How do you think that the courses that you've taken, or have they, brought in subjects that are relevant to you as an African American?
Well, to be honest, I really feel like they don't a lot. And like with the history, we only touch a brief period on slavery, and even then it's really light. They kind of make it as if it wasn't as harsh as
they want to gloss over it. Yeah.
Yeah, they gloss over it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like they also don't teach about important figures in history for African Americans, like Lewis Latimer, who created the carbon filament. They just teach about Thomas Jefferson. And I feel like that damages African American children, because we need to know that we can be successful, that we can be the president, instead of being what the media presents us as only rappers or movie stars and thugs and gangsters.
Yeah,
that's really powerful, because that's our job. We should be doing that. And Tanya, having been in our system in education for so long, what do you say to Jordan about, what can we do?
Well, I have an answer. So I'm working on my dissertation right now, and the theory that I'm using is culturally relevant pedagogy. And it does just that, Jordan. One of the parts of that theory says that children should know about more than just their culture, but also teachers. Teachers should be culturally competent, even if they knew, like, let me just give an example. So 80% of African Americans attend church. And there's something that we do in our Black church called call and response. And so if you knew that about African American students, you could use it as pedagogy. So let's say you stand up in a Black church and the pastor says, "Can I get an amen?" And then they automatically respond, "Amen." They know to do that without having been trained. But what if a teacher took that and used it as pedagogy? It would be something that related deeply to that Black student's identity that would actually help them to learn better. That's cultural competence. So if teachers were to engage with their students knowing something about their culture, it actually would really honestly fit the definition of being student-centered, because a lot of what we do tends to be teacher-centered. But if we really want to reach students where they're at, you have to identify with their culture and use their culture as a bridge. Now, that means that a lot of educators would have to change, because nearly 80% of teachers in America are white. So that means there's some work that needs to be done, which is why I chose that as part of my dissertation. And so when we do that, that will automatically lead to higher achievement for African Americans and for Latinx students and for Indigenous students, because culture is woven into our brains. It isn't something that's separate from us. So I am so, it makes me sad, Jordan, to hear some of the things that you were experiencing. But if people genuinely want to do something about the achievement gap, how African Americans are significantly behind white students. If we really want to do something about that, we have to tap into culture. You cannot separate culture from who a person is.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that with the change in our administration and the changes that are coming in the Department of Education, and the fact that we have more people of color in leadership, I mean, you don't appreciate that until you realize that you're the only person of color in the room. And then you're like, well, no wonder you guys aren't thinking about that stuff. Just to give you an example, in Pima County, I received a report that sort of highlighted the number of people in leadership, whether they were male, female, and what ethnicity, if they've identified. 78 out of 104 are white. Now, the numbers for female and male are nice. That's great. It's like pretty even. But, I don't know if you've had somebody in the office that's asking to identify those issues. And that, I think, is really important. It's something that, when you have young people that are engaged and people that are in leadership positions like you, Tanya, that are identifying those things, it's like you have to acknowledge that there's certain things that are just not okay. And how do we identify them? You have to talk about it, and it's uncomfortable, and it makes people uncomfortable, because we all have to acknowledge that we do have, I know I have privilege, but I also understand that there's things that I've had to experience as a result of being a person of color that is not an experience for other people. And so you have to own that. And you have to own that. And I think that's something that is difficult, because you have to grab a mirror and look at yourself and how you're doing things and what you have to do different. It's important.
Yeah.
And so, so as far as for Martin Luther King Jr., the legacy, I mean, what frustrates me is kind of what Jordan said, is that we have like the one day we honor Martin Luther King Jr. We have one day that Cesar Chavez is honored, and not really, it's not a holiday. So, we just kind of have to continue to work on things. But you have these days where this is all we talk about for 1 or 2 days. And then, you go on with what is very much the traditional history, which is really not acknowledging contributions of people of color at all. And so, do you know of any activities where our community can get involved for Martin Luther King Jr., either the Day of Service or any organizations that young people can continue to get involved in, or someone like me who just wants to learn more and be a stronger advocate for people of color, and specifically African American people?
Well, I guess the first thing that I would say, Adelita, is that, like you, I'm looking for something beyond Black History Month, something beyond Indigenous, recognition or acknowledgement month. We have to actually move beyond that, because really what that does is send a message of awareness and even tolerance, rather than realizing that I'm actually Black all year long. I really am. And so we really want to get past that, because if not, it isn't actually going to accomplish anything. If we don't have this, what they call a socio-political consciousness, where you actually acknowledge the economic challenges of this particular group or the educational challenges, if we don't get into those real conversations, then nothing changes. And even the very work of equity, it is meant to disrupt. So I think it's great to have events that honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think that is absolutely awesome. But if people want to see real change, it needs to start with, what are you going to do when you wake up tomorrow, when it's not MLK Day? What are you going to do then? What are you going to do differently? Are you going to open your mouth and use your voice to lead change in your circle of influence? That's where you can be your own volunteer program. You can be your own ceremony. You can decide within yourself how you're going to honor his legacy by what you do every day, not just in January or not just in February. And so I think that, I can't think of any activities right off the top of my head, but that's the message that's in my heart is, what are you going to do regarding his legacy tomorrow and the day after that? And be aware that when you step into that place of doing that type of equity work, you are asking to get in maybe some rough places, because the work of equity is meant to disrupt. That's the only way you're going to get equity, is if you have the mindset of disruption. So it's, what are you going to do tomorrow for his honor? That's what
Jordan?
I agree. I think we also have to talk about social issues, and we have to bring awareness to the racism that we experience as minorities. And then as far as things that we're doing to honor MLK Day, I'm part of an organization called Jack and Jill that focuses on uplifting African American children. And so on MLK Day, we are donating hair care products and soaps to I'm 360.
And do you fundraise in order to get those supplies, or you ask for donations?
Well, we give money ourselves to get the supplies, and then we give them to other nonprofits.
That's great. That really is. And I think it's that whole culture of giving and looking out for other people. It's so important. And I'm optimistic that in this position with supervisor, when we look at what kind of training opportunities and educational opportunities are we giving people that have, there's this cycle of poverty, and the only way really to break it is education. And so how are we helping people get to that next level so their families are no longer in poverty? We have such a high number of people that are in poverty. And when you're talking about the kind of educational opportunities and relevance that you haven't had in your curriculum, it makes a lot of sense that a lot of the children that end up dropping out early are children of color, because it's like, well, I don't see myself in anything here. And that's what I think is so critical and important.
Yep, I would agree with you. I think that there are a lot of places where we can enact change. And I know that the pandemic has been a really challenging time for so many of us, but simultaneously, there's a tremendous opportunity for us to rewrite education. There's literally an opportunity for us to do education very differently than what we've done. I mean, if you think about, or if you've studied any of the history of our education system, this Western system was really designed for middle-class white families. It was not written for African-American families or Latinx families. It was not written for us. So when you put a test in front of us that uses language and things that aren't meant for us, but then you wonder why we aren't achieving, you got to go back to the basics. And so, I think that's my hope in all of this, is that our state leaders will look at how we're going to take advantage of this opportunity to rewrite education, to do it differently and do it right this time. And to me, that means embedding cultural competence and socio-political consciousness in our curriculum, to look at how we test, how we teach, and how we interact with students. So I'm hopeful that we'll take this opportunity and do things differently and not just maintain the status quo, because it actually isn't working.
No, and it hasn't been for a while. I mean, the whole idea of a classroom looking exactly like it did when I went to school in the 80s, it's like everything else is evolving. Why aren't we doing something different? And what was really telling to me is when we opened up online, and how many people, not just students, but staff, were in the digital divide and didn't have a device, didn't have access to internet. And we make it sound like, okay, well, you don't have access to internet, so you must live on this, on the outskirts or unincorporated Pima County or something like that. I lived on Mission and Ajo. This is really very close to many schools. And the reason why I didn't have access is because all of the broadband with Cox and Comcast has been expended. And so if for the families that lived right down the way who had one working parent at home, and we had this really great deal for practically free internet that we could access and the district would pay for, you have to be able to access the service, and they couldn't. And so we ended up, then the district had to buy little hotspots and put them all over the place, because what else were we going to do? We had children that for months had no device because of the pandemic. Everything was sort of shut down. And I do agree that now we have an opportunity with people telecommuting, with students that can't come in during the school year because they have other medical issues and they're compromised for some reason, or their family is, or they have other obligations that don't allow them to come into school in a traditional kind of setting, or it just doesn't work for them. Sitting there and moving from class to class is super distracting. And then for a lot of our students, that just doesn't work. And so how can we? And that was one of the things that I posed to our superintendent and our educational system in general. It's like, so how can we do this different so we can actually not lose these kids that we know are very bright? They just have a lot of other stuff going on in their lives that for a lot of us, we can't even appreciate. I mean, we don't really even understand the complications that some young people that are going to your school that are in third grade, the life that they've had to lead and the things they've had to get through to be to that point that they're at, going to school every day. I'm left speechless when I hear some of those things. It's just so sad, and they're so resilient. And so it's like, how do we channel that resiliency into something that is relevant and meaningful for them?
And I am glad that you mentioned resiliency, because resiliency is in my African American DNA. It's in who I am, because this is how, since day one, we've been taught how to survive. And so one of the things that I've talked to my staff about is I want you to have empathy, but I also want you to empower. I don't want you to enable, because one thing that we've had a lot of challenges in our life, but we also know how to get up when we've been knocked down. So we need to honor the resiliency that's also a part of our DNA and not just the struggle.
Jordan, as a young person, what kind of changes do you want to see happen for you for the next, your 2 years that you have left in K-12, but then beyond that, and for young people like you that are going to be that are attending right now, attending holiday and kinder, like Tanya's youngest?
Well, in terms of changes in the education system, I would really like to see more representation of my culture. And I would like to see more figures of African American history and Hispanic history and other minority groups that are like inventors or maybe important political figures, instead of just seeing white people all the time in the books. And then I would also like to see more trainings for teachers about prejudice towards minority figures, so that way we can get rid of lots of racism in the classroom, and then also we can help with the school to prison pipeline. And then in terms of the nation, I would really like to see unification between two groups of people. And then I would also like to see more African Americans and other minorities in political positions.
Well, I hope that people are paying attention and can write policy or listening to you, because you just highlighted so many things that would make it better for so many people. I wanted to introduce Dr. Halt. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Halt. And do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
I don't know what to say.
Well, no, just tell what you're involved in. Just a little bio about yourself, a couple of sentences. No pressure.
My name is Damon Holt, and people know me in my mental health and trauma work. They know me as a pastor. They know me as a community leader, president of the IMA, board chair of the Tucson Urban League, and a lot of people know my work with TUSD, with MSU and WEAC in Denver, Colorado. So pretty much working with a lot of children that have been experienced a lot of chronic stress and a lot of trauma, and explain from a scientific way that children are not learning, especially children of color, because they're ignorant or stupid. But there's the science of the brain that when the limbic system is in complete control and kids are in fight or flight or freeze because they're experiencing microaggressions, they're experiencing racial bias, they're experiencing disparities among discipline, or arresting kids from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse, known as school to prison pipeline, then yeah, the struggle is real. And I still not have added racial trauma as being a major issue of what our kids are experiencing. So lack of relationships, lack of attachments impacts the reality of kids. And so I would close in my introduction and say, you cannot impact how kids learn until you address how they feel. And that's just how it is. I know our structure and education system is a little backwards on rigorous instruction and standardized testing, but you first have to address how kids feel if you're most definitely going to impact how they learn.
We have been talking a lot about how our education system is not working for people of color. And I'm so glad that you're able to join us, because you add a whole other nuance of the trauma that a lot of young people have been experiencing. Jordan mentioned that she's had to deal with racism and not just at local, national levels. And so we started this conversation really talking about Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy and legacy of nonviolence. And I just wanted to ask you, what does Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy mean to you?
I think a lot of time we look at Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, as a great prolific leader, as a community leader, organizer, a robust movement of civil rights. But I think also on the spiritual side, you can't help but notice that Dr. Martin Luther King was a prophetic leader, which means that he had a prophetic voice. And when he spoke, whether if it made you nervous or whether if it made you intimidated or made you feel inspired, his voice was very prophetic. And I think that's so prophetic that we are living some of those struggles that he wanted to dare to see some of that in his lifetime. I'm standing on the shoulders of Dr. King. Tanya Strozier is doing the same thing. I believe we all are in our type of level of challenging the powers that be, speaking truth to power, and making sure that his legacy don't fall down on the ground, and that we pick up the mantle in our levels, right? You know, and our assignments are different. But I think when it comes to Dr. King's legacy, I think we all have a piece of that pie, and I think that whatever our assignments are, and I would say he was certainly a Moses, right? He was a Moses that not only impacted bondage and oppression, but even when Israel got free, they still had to wander in the wilderness and figure some things out in order to go to the promised land. And I think that that's where it's at. We, as people of color, are still trying to find that land filled with milk and honey of prosperity and empowerment and equality and equity. And I think that that's where Dr. King wants us to be.
Mm-hmm. So I know that you've mentioned a lot of the organizations that you've been a part of, and both Tanya and Jordan talked a little bit about that. But what is your reason? What is the reason? What drives you to get involved and stay involved in making our community better?
One, I would say for me is, I come from the Midwest. I'm from Flint, Michigan. And so I was accustomed to seeing an African-American mayor, African-American superintendent of schools, many people that look like me that sat on city councils, that took leading roles. And I would say that when I came here, one thing I noticed was a big culture shock is that I didn't see people that look like me that was making decisions. I didn't see enough people that look like me that wasn't just having meetings, that wasn't just marching, that wasn't just protesting, but sitting at the seat of the table where decisions are made, where policy is implemented to where it impacts communities that look like me, an African-American community. Because I understand out of sight, out of mind. And I do believe that sometimes people don't mean to leave us out. But the fact of the matter is, when it's out of sight, out of mind, and if we don't have more people that look like us making decisions at the seat at the table, then who's advocating for us? And not the fluffy stuff, right? We're talking about one thing you talked about racism, and in my racial trauma, I teach different manifestations of racism. And I think a lot of times we talk about the interpersonal racism, where microaggressions, racial slurs, the N-word, and all of that, right? But we fail to realize what's harder and what's more toxic to communities of color is the institutional and the systemic racism, where there's systems that are literally not broken on purpose to marginalize and disenfranchise people for generations. Like far as the wealth gap, we talk about the achievement gap, but the wealth gap for African Americans, we 10 times behind our white counterparts, and we need to most definitely be having some serious conversations about institutional racism, not just the interpersonal racism.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, talking about some of the things that obviously as a community we need to work on, what are the hopes for the recovery of our community? I mean, we're looking at a local level where we have some changes in the local system, but really bigger is national. And what was just striking to me when we had these domestic terrorists attack the Capitol, and I saw many members of Congress on the floor, huddled down, hiding. It shook me personally because my dad had just finished speaking and was walking off away from the podium on the chamber floor. The next member of Congress was Congressman Gosart, who started speaking, and then we had these people that just like barged in to the Capitol, and they had to usher him out. And there was a significant amount of time there that I didn't know where he was. I didn't know who was with him. And I'm just thinking of all of the other families that were all sitting there just like on pins and needles, and so many other members of our community that are concerned, because what was interesting to me is all of there were so many women of color, members of Congress, that were waiting to come down to speak, because with the pandemic everyone is going in shifts, and they were all there. And I just thought that's the concern that I have, that we just have so many people that are just feeling unprotected, and that's how so many of us feel all the time. And so with this change in leadership at the national level, and so many things that we have to work on to repair the last 4 years, but also really to move forward, because we can't pretend that everything was rosy 4 years ago. It's just been progressively worse because it's been right in your face. So what does recovery look like for us, as a nation and as a community?
Ooh-wee.
I know, right? I'm like, now go.
Oh man, you throw into that as some complex. Well, one of the things I would say is, going back to racism, we get weird and spooky when we start talking about race, right? It's like, it gets, the elephant in the room is like, should I say something? No, should you say something? Well, I don't want to look like a racist. I just get all weird. And one of the big things I understand is that you can't conquer something that you're not willing to confront first. Right. And I think racism now, especially institutional racism, need to be raised up to the level of being a threat to national security. Now that's deep, but I think we need to quit playing with racism. We need to quit playing with it. I think it's a threat to national security, and it needs to be on a high level. There needs to be something that perhaps, your dad and others are talking about on a federal level. But what you saw at the Capitol is exactly what I've said. Now, it may be said different, but we need to be looking at it. I mean, we've been to the point I've heard people say a public health crisis. I believe in some areas that's true, especially looking at how racism plays on the mental health and the emotional of Black and Brown Americans. But it's a national security issue. When ideology becomes a cult-like type of terrorism, to where now people that look like white folks is being attacked. It's saying something, right? It's saying that if you don't do something about this, and our strategy is not working, then we're going to go back to the old landmark of things of lynchings. That's what they're trying to take it back to. The federal flag is not about federal confederacy. it's the new emblem of racism. It's the emblem of racism. It's been that for a long time. And it's sad that it took some legislators to get a taste of what Black and brown folks have been getting for many years, and at a level of being covert. Because a lot of people say, well, it's not that bad. I mean, we let Barack Obama be the president for Get Outdoors, right? We don't have this stuff going on. And we have to realize how ugly violent, how ugly hatred is. And we know Donald Trump didn't create this, but most definitely he was a bandwagon and an influence that helped.
You in that fire, for sure.
He was the
and what struck me the most is the crowd for Black Lives Matter. We had everybody out there. We had tanks. And then you had these domestic terrorists that look like someone said that they look like the cast from the Duck Dynasty, like they're just all coming. And that's okay. Apparently that's totally fine and not at all scary. To me, I just couldn't, it was so, the difference was so striking that you can't look at that scenario and say there isn't any racism, that there is, that people of color storming the Capitol that way would not have resulted in a very different situation. Tanya, did you want to add something? I know it's a big question.
Yeah, honestly, I saw it unfolding on television, and as a Black woman, I just sat back. I don't want anyone to be harmed, but the things that were going through my mind is, welcome to the terror that I've lived my whole life. Welcome to the party, because I know that there were a lot of white people that were shocked and dismayed that, well, what happened to the tanks, and why don't they have tanks? And that's a good question. Why aren't they there? Because the way I watched it unfold is that there was such a delay. It was so very lax. The issue was that they were not perceived as dangerous, though people of color are assumed to be dangerous. That was the problem. That's why they got to stand around even after the curfew. That's why there was a delay. We know it had something to do with our leadership, but a delay in why there wasn't, the National Guard was not there immediately. So I think that opened some eyes to see, if you compare the Black Lives Matter movement and those protests that happened compared to what happened to the Capitol, you can see that there's a tremendous difference. But I think in my mind, it is still, what are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do the next day when everyone isn't in the hype of what happened and the shock that comes with it? My question is, what will you do with your shock and dismay tomorrow? How will you treat people differently? How will you use your voice in your circle of influence to do something different? And I'm with you, Dr. Hope. We can never conquer something that we don't ever want to talk about. And for me, my setting is in the classroom. And so one of the things that we do at my school is we teach kids now about multiple perspectives. That's a softer way of coming in to address that equity, is that there are multiple perspectives to Thanksgiving. There's multiple perspectives in history. There's multiple perspectives when the NBA was, when they were doing their protests. And that's how we talk to children, is we really want them to learn how to look at things from different perspectives. And we work with our staff, and it's just an ongoing process, but we have to start somewhere. But can you imagine the momentum that would be built if everyone just owned the fact that I can do something with my voice and with my body in my circle? There would be such an incredible ripple effect. So if you really want to embrace who Dr. King is, start your own ripple effect of how you are going to lead and facilitate change in your circle, in your home, on your job, at your church. I would challenge you, if you are white and watching this, talk to your white pastor about what he's going to do differently.
Thank you. So, Jordan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, first, I think it was absolutely ridiculous that they hesitated so much to send the National Guard, but when Black Lives Matter protested, they sent the National Guard right away, and there was tear gas and people were getting shot. And I just think the difference in treatments between African Americans and white people is ridiculous. And then also on what Ms. Tanya said, I would really appreciate if we did have those conversations in the classroom, if teachers allowed us to talk about racial injustice, because I know a lot of my friends, they're very ignorant towards these things and don't know because all they know is white privilege. And I would really appreciate it if I could have those conversations with them and actually educate them about racial injustice.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're coming to the end of our time. I told you it was going to go by so fast, but I just wanted to ask each one of you if you want to talk about something, an event that you're participating in that you'd like to invite community members to, or, you know, it's a day of service. And so what are some things that, you know, people can do for to honor Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy? Anybody?
Well, my position is still your whole life. It's what you're going to do in your circle, what you're going to do when this broadcast ends. Who will you talk to? Can you share? I mean, if someone just did something as simple as sharing this on your timeline, because I'm sure we all know someone who could really benefit from the conversation that we've had in these 45 minutes. Share this information, share this conversation, and let it be a springboard into another conversation in your home about how we interact with people. You know, I mean, and just know that it really starts with dealing with your own implicit biases, because we all have them. We all have them, but we all have a responsibility to do something about those implicit biases. First of all, discover them, and then be responsible for whatever you choose to do with that bias.
Thank you. Dr. Holt?
I'm big on you really don't know about your destiny until you really aware about your history. And I think that we've been fighting for a long time with school districts around the nation to just get Black history. That, believe it or not, that's still a fight. And, you know, keeping the fidelity of Black history without distorting it and without watering it down, because we don't want to make people feel all weird and you know, on the defense. But we have to have these brave conversations, and people need to know the history. I think, too, that we have an issue with looking at trajectories of healing, is because there's a lot of people don't know the history. We still have a lot of Black students that don't know enough about Black history, besides a lot of watered down stuff. So I think looking at curriculum and looking at content and looking at school districts to set policy to make sure that we have a real, genuine Black history curriculum in school districts is going to be a good start, because it's hard for you to really look at where can we heal when we're still hurting, when we don't know about all of our history. So starting with that and then creating a bridge how we can cross over.
Absolutely. Jordan?
Yeah, mine is basically just what everyone else said, getting to know your history. And about getting to know your history, there's a really good book by Carter G. Woodson called The Miseducation of the Negro. So I really recommend that. And then also just talking about those conflict, those hard to talk about conversations about racial injustice, and educating your people.
Well, thank you. I know we're going to also, there's going to be a virtual sort of, since we can't get together, we're going to have some community leaders speaking at the virtual celebration on Monday, the 18th from 10 to 12, and it'll be streaming live. And this will be, Dr. Holt, you'll be there, because it's the IMA, it's Interfaith Ministerial Alliance. Is that correct? Community Action Team. And they'll be on the Facebook page. And then there'll be some there's another page talking about volunteer service and the National Day of Service. That'll be at 3:00, and you can sign up. And there's a virtual performances and the fundraiser for Casa Adelita. So those are two things that we know about. And if there's anything else, please make sure to add them to the chat. One of the things, someone that's watching, Anne, said the education system needs to let teachers and staff go beyond the classroom and teachings of all minority. And I like to say people of color, because minority assumes that we're the smaller number, and we're not. We're the bigger number. There's more of us. Yeah. Educational leaders of departments need to not be afraid of staff going beyond to teach and bring culture into our schools. And that's exactly what we've been talking about. I do think education is a platform for a lot of this, where we really need to start here, but then it needs to go beyond. And so I want to thank you all so much for the time that you took. It's a very quick, in the middle of Saturday, and I appreciate it. I know all of you are very busy. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your service and all that you do, and for being three voices on the importance of legacy, education. I mean, there were so many things that I was just writing down notes of. Basically, I agree that racism is a threat to national security and is a threat to our health. And so we have to do more and do better. So I'm thankful for all of you, and thankful that I have your cell number, so I can always text you if I need a question, a call, or anything. So I really appreciate it.
I apologize for being late. I feel bad.
You know what? What it is it's life. Things happen. What are you gonna do? I'm glad that you were here. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Thank you.
All right, guys. Good seeing everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And so we do have a couple more minutes left, and I did want to bring our District 5 team. They've been waiting in the wings, and I'm so very proud of all of these amazing people. So we're missing one, probably connection issues, as I'm guessing that's our team. We have Keith Bagwell, Elvira Suarez-Den, and Arlette Rios Morrison. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have them introduce themselves really quickly, because we are your D5 team. We are the ones that are going to be working for District 5 in Pima County, and I wanted them to have an opportunity so you can connect with a face without a mask, because for the foreseeable future, that's how you'll see us if we ever see you in person. And so I'll just go ahead and let them introduce themselves, and we'll start with Elvira.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elvira Suarez-Den, and I'm joining Adelita's District 5 team. I'm very excited. So prior to working with Adelita on the official side representing District 5, I was her campaign manager in 2020, and also worked on Congressman Raul Grijalva's campaign, and now Mayor Regina Romero's campaign. So I'm very excited to join the official side of things. I know on the campaign side, there's always a lot of work and care about the platform that we're going to put forward, and always talking to the community about what needs we need to address and what issues we want to work on. So I'm really looking forward to getting to work on the official side to make those dreams actually happen and come into fruition. So I'm very excited. Nice to meet everyone virtually.
And thank you. And I think it's going to be so important, because Elvira and I worked really closely on when we're talking to people, when you're filling out, groups are asking like what your platform is, what are you going to do? And so what I think is great is that Elvira coming over to the policy side, we actually get to implement and make sure that we're held accountable for all of those promises that you make, those things that you really want to happen, to make sure that we don't get lost in the day-to-day, that we lose focus on what are those things that are really important. And I think that that's really critical. And I'm so glad that you both were able to listen in to the conversation, because so much of it is why I have been involved in the community period. And I know why each of you has decided to be a part of changing the narrative and changing policy. And I think that that's what our focus is going to be. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Arlette Rios Morrison. Well, she's going to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arlette Rios Morrison. I actually have served in public service through local government for 12 years before joining Adelita's team. I was a clerk of the board for Cochise County for about 8 years. So I've kind of been on that side, the administrative side. So I'm so excited to actually work on the supervisor side and help Adelita with all the things that she put her campaign foundation on, and help those things come to fruition. I'm excited to meet more of the District 5 constituents and find out what's important to them. And hopefully my experience and my background will come in handy in our journey for the next 4 years. So thank you, Adelita, for letting me be part of your team. And Elvira and Keith have been so great. And I'm just happy that I am going to get this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And so I'm just going to have you guys share just one little thing about you that is people don't know, that they might be surprised. A little fun fact. We'll go ahead and start with Arlette. I'll just go backwards.
So a fun fact about me is that I was born in Mexico, And it's not a fun fact, but it's a real fact. And I want people to know this because right now, with Martin Luther King Day and just things going on nationally, I actually went through the process that many families here, Latin American families, face. And my mom was deported in 2019. So it's something that's close to my heart. And I know that we're going to be working on immigration issues and how we can make that process better for families, because even knowing English very well, I can tell you that it was such a scary thing to go through.
Mm-hmm. It is. Elvira?
Thank you for sharing, Arlette. I think a fact about myself is I couldn't think of anything. I think my biggest passion is really just demystifying public service and women in government. And so I guess a fun fact is I worked for the first Latina mayor of Tucson and also the first Latina to be elected to serve on the board of
Mhm.
supervisors. So that's a big passion. I also like K-pop, which is always the thing that I like to tell people so I can get, if anyone doesn't know what to get me on my birthday, just get me something related to
We've had to have some tutorials because I'm a little lost. So one of the things about me, like, I don't know. I think one of the things about me is that I'm a mom of 3, and I have my husband Sol works for Pima Community College, but he also is part of the D5 family because he worked with Richard. So when Richard first was appointed to the position, before he actually ran, Sol has knew Richard Elias long before I did. And so one of the things that's funny is what I hear often is that once you're a D5er, you're always a D5er. And it resonates with me because really I've continued to know so many people that even when I first was elected in order to run, so many people that were like, well, I worked in D5, or I worked with your dad, or I mean, it's just like a legacy that continues through this community. So I'm really glad to have such a strong team that are really passionate about issues. We're all working on some different things. And so with the last few minutes, do you each want to talk about some of the things that you're focusing on individually? And then we all are obviously going to be cross-trained on a lot of things, and they'll be training me on some things too, I'm sure. So Elvira, do you want to talk about what your focus is in the office?
Yeah, so in the office, I've sort of been the communications and digital person for some time. So a lot of things you see online, I have had something to do with. So that's sort of been a big focus. I also am going to be helping with neighborhood association meetings. And like Adelita mentioned, all of us will be taking a piece of that pie, working with different neighborhood associations in the city and in District 5, and helping out with any policy related issues or youth outreach is going to be something that I'm going to be working on. So if anyone knows anyone who would like to volunteer for District 5, please let us know. And yeah, just I have a big passion for protecting the Sonoran Conservation Plan, and immigration is a big policy issue, and just general youth engagement and transparency with our offices are the sorts of things that I'll be working on.
Thank you, Elvira. Arlette?
So my main focus is going to be creating resources among all the government agencies that come across District 5. I think it's really important that anyone knows who to call to get a permit, to talk about roads, to talk about recycling, waterways, trash. So I'm going to make sure that we get a good resource page out there. My passion is just public service in general, but I actually like to focus more on our tenured folks, because even though they've been around a long time, with technology impacting the way that we provide services, it can be a little intimidating. So I like to kind of reach back out to those folks and make sure that they know, hey, we still have people here. They're still going to answer your phones, and technology isn't that scary.
It is. Thank you so much. And thank you to both of you for on a Saturday jumping on so we could see your lovely faces, and for all the work that we're doing now and that we'll continue to do. And so our contact information will be in the link website. And so I encourage you all to join our newsletter, and so we can get information out to you as timely as possible. That's all of our info there. And anything you see that is not on Facebook, is generated by either Arlette or Elvira, because I haven't. Speaking of the digital divide, speaking of being old and not wanting to learn new things, I'm working on it, I promise. But really,
I didn't say
my daughter's like, you have so much stuff on Insta. I said, I didn't do any of that. Yeah. I haven't done any of it. So, but thank you all so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. I know that Monday is a day of service. And so we're looking for, as a family, something that we can go do. I think we're going to go and pick up at Joaquin Murrieta Park, just because we've gone there a couple times to play basketball, stuff like that. And it needs a little bit of love. So we're going to do that. But I know if anyone has ideas on other service projects or things that they do, please share them so other people can get involved.
Yeah, and I wanted to say just a special thing for Keith. He really tried joining on. This is him right here. And this is all of our contact information. So if you would like to reach out to us directly, please feel free to email. Keith is a really invaluable member of our team.
Keith is our senior staff. He was with Richard Elias and also with Betty Villegas. He is so knowledgeable on really all things Pima County. So he is our go-to for any of the systems that are going on in Pima County. He's been very involved in COVID response, the Sonoran Conservation Plan. I mean, we're just so very fortunate to have Keith as part of our team. And so we miss him. I'm glad you keep putting his picture up, because I'm like, oh yeah, there he is. And so he's also very accessible. And if any of you have worked with Keith in the past, his number hasn't changed, so you can just continue to use that extension. Well, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday. And then I encourage everyone to do something in honor of Martin Luther King's legacy. But then, as Tanya continued to say, it's what we continue to do every day to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye.